Hello, my name is Nigel Griffiths. I'm working in Advanced Technology Support to IBM near London. In this video, we'll be looking at PowerVC 1.3.1. This is part 2. We're looking at project features. Now, it says Standard Edition in here, where it's available. It's also quite important when we look at the Cloud Manager Edition of PowerVC. It's quite complicated to start with, but not too bad once you get used to it. I'm glad I've separated this out to separate videos so we can just cover this before we get to the Cloud Manager. In part 1, we looked at all the things in purple, green and red. In this one, we'll be looking at projects and user roles. This is useful for separating the virtual machines, disks and images into separate projects to allow different groups of people to work on just their resources. So why have we got these projects and user roles? Well, previously we weren't aware of it at the time that we actually had a project. It's called IBM Default. It wasn't visible to us. Then there was an OpenStack role called admin that owns all of the resources, the boxes, the servers, the storage units, the virtual machines, images and everything. And the way we got access to that is we had an admin Linux user group. If you were in that group, then you have admin privileges to everything. And then with other user groups called deployer and viewer, similar sort of setup. The viewer, of course, can't actually change anything, but the deployer can do things like create new virtual machines and manage the virtual machines, but can't fiddle about with the boxes and storage providers and things like that. Now, to make it more flexible for larger teams of people using a single copy of PowerVC, we now have these projects. So we have exposed the projects, the roles, and using the user groups is optional. In a large setup, you might have 50 boxes over here which are production, and 40 over here which are for development, and 30 over here that are the internal. And you don't want to accidentally put the developers on the production machines and then have to move them out of the way and those sorts of things. So saying the same thing in more of a diagram, we have in the past the IBM default group that still carries on. We have an admin role that carries on, but if you do a fresh install, you don't have the admin user group. You could set that up if you wanted to. And that role, an admin user, owned everything. The machines, the storage, the virtual machines, the images, everything in here is owned and controlled by the admin user. Let's build up the picture now with the newer projects involved. Let's create 3 projects. Well, we only have to create 2. The IBM default is there when you do the install. Next, we're going to go to the host panel to manage a host. It will ask you, well, which HMC is it connected to? And we can select a HMC. Once we do that, that HMC is now visible to all 3 projects. We don't have to do this 3 times. Next, via the HMC, you can see all the machines that it's connected to and decide which of those you want to manage. When you manage those, they are visible to all the projects. The same is true for the storage providers. We can see those once you've logged in and set the credentials up, and if you're using a shared storage pool, they only become found when you actually start managing a virtual machine in the pool. But again, that will work across all 3 projects. And now you'll find on those hosts you can see all the virtual machines that they're running, and we can see in the storage providers their images or the virtual disks that are in there, and we can start to manage those. Now the next bit might catch you out slightly. Once we manage a particular virtual machine or a deployable image or a virtual disk, it comes into the project that you're running when you do that manage of a resource. But these are only available in one project. If you go into the 7 project as the admin user and get to the machine to list all the virtual machines that it's running, you'll find that this one is missing because it's already being managed by an alternative project. So these resources can only appear in one project. And so I can start pulling in my virtual machines, my images and my virtual disks into my various projects. Now if in this diagram I did all of the virtual machines, for example, we'd end up with a right old bird's nest of various virtual machines in various projects, and we could get confused and we could lose our virtual machines, like which project did I put that in? I can't remember. So it's worthwhile getting organized. So here's one little suggestion. Perhaps our project 6 has been allocated these particular host machines for that project. And so I could go onto those and adopt all the virtual machines on those 2 machines to get us started. Then if I want to create more virtual machines, I'd have to get an image prepared for that and pull that in, manage it as a disk, and then you import it as an image. This is how we've done this in the past. And then once we have our image, we can deploy. I can make sure I can deploy to these two machines in here. It made good sense to make this into a host group, so I can always target the least busy of my hosts in my project. One little quirk in here is that if I have an image in here, perhaps just the latest version of AX 7.2 set up the way we want, if I now wanted to use that in a different project, perhaps in Project 7, we can't share this image, and there's notes in the Redbook saying we can't, at this release, share some of these objects. So what I'd have to do is create a new piece of disk space, and then I somehow have to clone that image, put it in here, and then I could adopt or manage that particular new copy of the image in here. So a little bit of extra work in this release to cover that. So let's move to the specifics of how we control these projects and roles. There's one command we use to actually create a project. Don't forget the IBM default is there already. And this is mostly to give it a name. There are some attributes, but we don't have to go there. Then, in the example we have dev and test. So we're going to run the create project command twice for each project. Then we're going to create a series of users. And so I'm going to run an add user command to create those particular users. And then for each user, I'm going to run an OpenStack command to assign a role for a particular project. So some users may just have admin in test and admin in dev, for example. But we may have a user that is an admin in IBM default and has a deploy role in test and only has a viewer for the dev project. So we'd actually assign them 3 different roles for those 3 different projects. Now the roles are actually documented in the Redbook. You've got the section in here. The admin, deployer and viewer roles are there. So we can use those. It says in the Redbook that the deployer is deprecated, so that was going away in the future. But there's 6 new roles which are sort of variations and combinations of the admin, deployer and view. There's also, if you're using the Cloud Edition, one called Self-Service, which adds the extra features that you get with the Cloud Edition. We'll cover that when we get to it in a later movie. Now, before we start creating projects, let's do something a little bit simpler to get us used to the idea. By default, the root user has the admin role for the IBM default project. And that's not a good idea to use root ID to access PowerVC. So for security reasons, we're going to create a new user called PowerVC, nice and easy to remember, as this new master user. So they have admin roles for the default project. And this should help us understand the controlling of projects. So we're going to use the add user Linux command, Red Hat in this case, to create the user and set the password. Then we're going to use this OpenStack role add command. And you can see the parameters are there, the project, the user, PowerVC user that we just created, and the role is actually at the end of the command. A little bit odd, but there we are. And we get a whole bunch of an error message coming out. It's pretty ugly. If you're a REST API expert, you may recognize these. These are some of the attributes you have to set if you want to be on one machine and talk to OpenStack, or in this case PowerVC, on a different machines. That might give you a clue about what's going on. So let's go and fix that now. So we've already run the first command, then we're going to run source and this file name in here. Now don't worry about the contents of that, we'll look at that on the next slide. Then we're going to set this OS username and OS password to root and the root password, the actual one, not the name that I've written on here. Then we can run this OpenStack command again, and it returns in about a second or two. And so we've now given admin privileges for the IBM default to the PowerVC user. We can now log in into Linux if we know the password, and we can use the web pages just as we could do with root in the past. However, the CLI commands, like you have in opt IBM PowerVC bin, you still need to run those as root. And if you want to run the OpenStack commands, then we have to do something that we'll see on the next slide. So here's the contents of that PowerVC RC file. quite complicated. I have no idea what most of this stuff does. It's just this is what you need. Third line down is the actual host name of my PowerVC. Well, I had to cut it down to make it fit on the slide. And we can see the OS username and OS password are blank. You can fill that in there, then you don't have to keep typing it in each time. Now we can use this file to get the new PowerVC user to be able to run the OpenStack commands, and we'll show you that next. Now there's no rocket science in here. We're taking a copy of the file, putting it into the user's home directory. We're editing that file so we can put the root and password in there. Then we're going to make it secure so other people can't see the root's password. And we're going to add it to the bash profile, so whenever you log in it will go and run the source command to go and get that, and we can do that here. Then we have to log out and log back in, or we could just type in the source command to actually get it to do it this time. Now the PowerVC user can use the OpenStack commands. Right, so let's go back to looking at creating project and setting up the user roles. Now we have that environment set up so that the OpenStack commands work. Now I'm not going to type these long commands in because that's pretty boring, and they will take less than a second to complete, so that it's not very exciting to actually do. So if we want to create a project, OpenStack project create, that's fairly obvious, isn't it? You can use minus note in here, minus description in double quotes, and here's the name of the project. And we can do with all these sort of commands, they have the OpenStack project list, and you can see it in here. The project 6 has been created. So let's go and set some roles for the users. Reminder, I'm going to have to create my users, not good passwords up in here. Then I'm going to use OpenStack role add, the project and the user, and here's the role admin. And I'm doing the same again for the half dozen user. If we use OpenStack user list, then we can see there's a whole bunch of other ones in here that are part of the system. We shouldn't play with those, but we can see PowerVC 6 admin and half dozen in here. But whoops, I made a mistake in here. I gave half dozen full admin privileges. Let's just make him a deployer. So I need to get that admin privilege off him, and to do that, OpenStack role remove project and user, and the role I want to remove. So he doesn't have any privileges now, and then I'm going to add him back and give him deployer privileges. While we're on the command line, we can try some of these other OpenStack commands and options. OpenStack role list gives us the list of the roles. As you might imagine, we have the admin, deployer and viewer from the old days. We got a bunch of new ones in here. Look in the Redbook for the definition of these, and if we got the Cloud Edition, we'll have a one called self-service that gives us a whole bunch of things. We'll look at that in another movie. If we actually log in with the users we just created, 6 admin, of course it's the admin guy, and we can see in here this is the user name and this is the name of the project 6. Rather boring over here because we haven't actually brought in any resources yet. If we then click on your name, normally you get log out, but now we get change project as well, and it gives you a list of projects. Now this guy's only allowed one project at the moment, so we could have created more and given them roles to get in there. So he can't actually change a project because he's only got one at the moment. I've got another system set up in here with a guy called Humble, and you can see here's a list of projects. If you click the other one, he's in test. If you click prod for production, change password, it says, hang on, are you sure you want to change your project at the moment? Anything you've done on this screen up until now, if you haven't saved it or committed the change, then that'll get lost as you change to the other project. If we go back to 6 admin in here and we click on the host button, we can see because he's full admin, he can add a host, has to put in the HMC details so they can drill down to the hosts. If we go to the half dozen user who is a deployer, of course, he doesn't get any of these options. He can't control or she control any of the hosts or the storage providers. Also for half dozen, I've brought in some virtual machines and some images now. So this again is the half dozen user deployer. They can click on an image and then they can control those, and if there's a virtual machine they can click on that and they can do the life cycle of a virtual machine, including capture. Before we finish, just a little hint in here, the OpenStack commands will provide you information based on how far you type the command in. So OpenStack project create gives you all the options. We'll be using description in here and the project name. OpenStack role add If you leave out the add, you'll find that there's be very careful actually with delete. There's a delete and a remove. Do get the right one. We can, in this case, we use the project and the user, and then the role at the end. Note in here, though, that there is a ---- group, so we could attach a role instead of to a specific user to a user group, as in the Linux user group. And this is what we did in the past, where we had a user group called admin, and that one always got admin for the IBM default project. So you could do it that way. I think that might be useful if you're using LDAP to control your usernames and user groups, for example. Well, that's more than enough on the projects and user roles. Right, if we've learnt something during this video, then great. Click on the like button below, please. And don't forget my usual advert, Mr. nmon on Twitter. All the movies that I make are under the channel nigelargriffiths. Got my blog there and the 2 user groups that do monthly webinars. Very useful. Some top guys doing those.